My sister got pregnant by my boyfriend, and my parents asked me to give up my inheritance. For the sake of family peace, I gave them an answer so sharp it cut the roots of whatever was left between us. I was 24 when everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and family shattered in one weekend. Back then, I believed I had it all: a solid relationship, a boyfriend who made me laugh, and a younger sister who I would have taken a bullet for. Her name was Maya. 2 years younger than me, practically my twin in spirit. We shared secrets, late night talks, and dreams of our futures. I never imagined she'd be the one to steal mine. Kyle, my boyfriend at the time, wasn't perfect, but he was mine. We'd been together for a little over a year when I introduced him to my family. I should have paid more attention to the way Maya's eyes lingered on him, or how she'd volunteer to get drinks just to sit next to him. But I didn't, because I trusted her blind. So when I found messages, disgustingly flirtatious ones, between them, I felt like I'd been gutted. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was blood deep. And the real twist? That wasn't even the worst part. Before the betrayal, before everything fell apart, I loved Kyle with my whole heart. We met during a group project in a communications class in college. He had this quiet confidence about him. Nothing flashy, but it drew me in. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, it mattered. That was rare, especially in a room full of people trying to prove something. We started with coffee after class, then dinners, then long walks back to our dorms, where he'd hold my hand like I was something precious. It was the kind of love that felt grounding, safe. At the time, I didn't have much of that. My family, though not cruel, was never exactly warm. My mom was all about appearances, how we looked, how we were perceived, what the neighbors might think. My dad was quieter, emotionally unavailable, and buried in work. So when Kyle came into my life, he felt like the first person who truly saw me. I clung to that. For over a year, we built something that, to me, felt real. We didn't live together. Our culture frowned on it unless you were married. But we spent weekends at his apartment, talking for hours, cooking, watching dumb reality shows. I loved how thoughtful he was. He remembered my deadlines, my favorite flavor of ice cream, and the way I hated being touched when I cried. He was attentive in all the small, quiet ways that sneak up on you and make you fall even harder. And then there was Maya. She was my little sister, 2 years younger, funnier, prettier in that effortless way. Maya had always been a little wild, the kind of girl who turned heads without trying, but we were close. Growing up, we shared a room, secrets, clothes. I was the responsible one. She was the free spirit. I didn't resent her for it. I admired it. I thought we balanced each other out. When I brought Kyle home for the first time, I was nervous, not because I thought anything would happen, but because my family could be difficult. My mom gave him that tight-lipped smile she reserved for things she couldn't control. My dad barely acknowledged him. But Maya, she lit up. It clicked instantly. She laughed at all his jokes, even the ones I'd heard a dozen times. She teased him, playfully poked his arm, and called him by cute nicknames that, at the time, I thought were harmless. She was just being Maya. That's what I told myself. Looking back, there were moments that should have made me pause, like how she always found a reason to be around when he was visiting, or how she'd sit too close on the couch, her legs barely an inch from his. Once, I caught her wearing one of my hoodies, one I'd left at his place. I raised an eyebrow, and she shrugged, saying, "You left it in the laundry room, so I took it." It didn't even register then. That's how much I trusted her. She was my sister. I loved her so fiercely that I never saw her as a threat. During those early months, Kyle and I talked about the future, moving in together, marriage, maybe even starting a family. I was already adjusting my life around him, planning job applications near his city, skipping social outings to spend weekends together. He became the center of my world, and I would have done anything to protect that, including Maya. When she went through a rough patch with school, I was the one who stayed up helping her with essays. When she got dumped by some guy she barely dated, I let her cry on my shoulder for hours, even when Kyle and I had plans. I thought love meant being available for both of them. But love can be blinding, especially when it's stretched too thin, given too freely. What I didn't know was that while I was making sacrifices, covering for Maya at home, or bending my schedule to make things work with Kyle, they were making their own plans together. Back then, though, I was just happy, foolishly, blissfully happy, and maybe that's the cruelest part of it all, how deeply I believed in what we had, how hard I worked to hold everything together, only to be the last one to see the cracks forming. I remember one night in particular, a Saturday in early spring. Kyle had surprised me with dinner reservations and a handwritten note tucked inside a book I'd been wanting. We laughed the whole way home. I fell asleep in his arms thinking, this is it. This is who I'm going to marry. And somewhere in that same weekend, Maya texted him something flirty, something that made him smile when I wasn't looking. I know now because I saw the message in the chat history later, but at that moment I had no idea. I just loved him, and I loved her, and I thought they both loved me back. There was a time when I believed loyalty was the foundation of everything, of family, of love, of life itself. I held on to that belief like it was gospel, even when the signs around me were begging me to reconsider. Like how my mom once pulled me aside and said, "Don't get too serious with him, you don't know what men want." I'd brushed it off as old school thinking, but now I wonder if she knew something I didn't. Or if she simply never thought I deserved someone like Kyle. The truth is, I spent most of my 20s trying to prove I was enough for my partner, for my family, for everyone. I carried expectations like bricks in my chest and smiled through the weight of it. I wanted to be the good daughter, the supportive girlfriend, the loving sister. I wore every role like a second skin. Never once did I think they'd all tear off at once. But before all that unraveling, I really did believe in us, in him, in her, and that's what made the betrayal cut so deep. At first, the signs were subtle, too subtle. It started with Maya showing up more often whenever Kyle was around. She lived an hour away from school, but suddenly she had reasons to come home every weekend. "I missed mom's cooking," she'd say, or "I need to pick something up." It felt innocent, familial. I was glad, honestly. I liked that they got along. I thought it meant he was being folded into the family. But slowly the dynamic shifted. I'd find myself on the sidelines of conversations between them, inside jokes I didn't get, references I hadn't heard. Once I walked in on them laughing in the kitchen, they stopped abruptly when they saw me. Kyle said, "Oh, just telling Maya about that thing at the grocery store. No details, just vague enough to leave me guessing." I told myself not to be paranoid. They were just comfortable, right? I wanted to believe that. Then there were the comments. Maya started teasing me in front of him more than usual. "You're such a lightweight, Jenna," she'd say when we had wine. "No wonder Kyle looks bored at parties." I'd laugh it off, but it stung. Kyle never defended me, just chuckled and looked away. And my mom, she made it worse. She'd say things like, "Maya's always been the more charismatic one. You were always the serious girl." Sometimes she'd pull Kyle aside and talk to him in hushed tones. When I asked what they were discussing, he'd smile and say, "Just your mom being your mom." But I always felt like they were keeping something from me. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home. The breaking point was a family barbecue we hosted at my parents' house. The backyard was full of relatives, kids running around, and the scent of grilled chicken in the air. I was bringing out plates when I noticed Kyle and Maya sitting unusually close to the garden. She had her hand on his knee, not resting, gripping. It was a fleeting moment, but it turned my stomach. Later that evening, I confronted Maya in the bathroom. "Why are you always so flirty with Kyle?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes. "Flirty? Please. That's just how I am. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd keep his attention. I stared at her, stunned. What's that supposed to mean? She smirked and pushed past me. Figure it out. That night, Kyle acted like nothing had happened. I watched him scroll through his phone, laugh at something, and then look at me like I was supposed to be okay. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like something wrong was happening in plain sight, and I was the only one who noticed. The worst part, I began to question myself. Was I imagining things? Was I just insecure? My emotional labor tripled. I overcompensated, planned romantic nights, cooked his favorite meals, and bought concert tickets. I was trying to compete with my sister without even admitting that's what I was doing. I hated myself for it. One weekend, Kyle bailed on plans last minute, work stuff, he said, but I later found out from Emma, my youngest sister, that he was spotted at the movies with Maya. I confronted him. He denied it, said Emma must be mistaken, that, she didn't seem right, that it was someone else. He was so calm, so convincing that I actually doubted my baby sister. I apologized to him. I still can't forgive myself for that. Meanwhile, Maya started acting territorial. She'd borrow my clothes without asking, especially the ones Kyle liked. Once I caught her spraying my perfume before going out. When I asked why, she smiled sweetly. He said it smelled amazing on you. I wanted to see if it worked on me too. Each act was a paper cut, small but constant, and eventually I was bleeding. And then came the guilt tripping. My mom began pushing me to help Maya more. She's still finding herself, she'd say. You're the older one, be more understanding. Even when Maya clearly crossed boundaries, I was expected to be the bigger person. Kyle never intervened, not once. I'd cry in the shower just to let it out without raising suspicion. I started staying late at work, not because I had to, but because going home felt heavier than the office. I journaled obsessively, trying to make sense of the unease that clawed at me. Then came a particularly cruel moment, one I still can't erase. It was my birthday. Kyle said he had to work late. I understood and told him we could celebrate later. That evening, I opened social media and saw a photo of Maya and Kyle at a rooftop bar. Tagged by one of Maya's friends, the caption read, "Cutest duo." I stared at it for 5 full minutes. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. I confronted Maya again, shaking, phone in hand. She smirked. We were just out with friends, she said. Besides, he needed someone to talk to. You've been so emotional lately. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the person I thought I was, the loving sister, the loyal girlfriend, with the reality unfolding around me. I was the outsider, the afterthought, the shadow. The signs weren't subtle anymore. They were flashing red, and still I clung to denial because admitting the truth would mean facing a betrayal I wasn't ready for. Here's my data. The truth came crashing down on a rainy. I'd gone to Kyle's apartment for the weekend. Nothing was off, at least not on the surface. We ordered takeout, watched a couple of episodes of a show we were binging, and talked about a potential weekend trip in the spring. Everything seemed normal. So when he got up to take a shower that afternoon, I was relaxed, content even. But then his phone buzzed. Normally, I never touched it. I wasn't the kind of girlfriend who snooped. If you had to go through someone's messages, you probably didn't trust them. And if you didn't trust them, what were you even doing there? But something about the way the screen lit up over and over made my stomach twist. I hesitated but picked it up. Maya. Her name flashed across the screen with a heart emoji next to it. My pulse kicked into overdrive. I told myself it must be some kind of joke. Maybe she'd sent him a meme or something dumb. They were close, I guessed. Or maybe she needed help with something innocent. But the moment I opened the message thread, my hands began to shake. There were messages, dozens of them, some recent, some from weeks, even months ago. I scrolled backward in time through private jokes I didn't understand, pet names I had never heard, references to nights they'd met up. There were photos, her in a towel, him shirtless, messages that made me nauseous. I wish you were here last night. You drive me crazy. Can't stop thinking about your skin. I couldn't breathe. My ears rang. I scrolled faster, desperate for something that would prove this wasn't what it looked like. But it only got worse. There were dates that overlapped with times Kyle had canceled on me, lies he'd told, moments I had doubted myself, all traced back to this. I took screenshots, every damning message, every photo. My hands were trembling, but I kept going until I had enough evidence to drown them both. Then I put the phone down, grabbed my bag, and left. I didn't wait for him to get out of the shower. I didn't give him the chance to explain. I walked out the door, down the stairs, into the rain, and I didn't stop until I was back in my car. I drove in silence. When I got home, I sent the screenshots to myself and then forwarded them to our group chat with mutual friends. I didn't say anything, just let the images speak for themselves. Then I blocked his number. I wanted to block Maya too, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see her face. The next morning, I booked a flight. My hands still shook when I moved, but my mind was sharp. I landed that evening and went straight to my parents' house. Maya was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like it was any other day, like she hadn't just lit my world on fire. I dropped the printed screenshots onto the table in front of her. She looked up, blinked, then picked them up, skimmed them, and shrugged. Yeah, she said, I did it, so what? My mother gasped. My father stood frozen. I waited for the explosion, for someone to speak, to yell, It was my mother who moved first. She slapped Maya across the face so hard I heard the crack. It was the first time I'd ever seen her lose control. My father started shouting, demanding Maya pack her things and leave. You've disgraced this family, he yelled. You're no daughter of mine. For a brief moment, I felt vindicated. But it didn't last. 2 days later, Maya dropped the bomb. She was pregnant with Kyle's child. Everything shifted. My parents, who had been ready to disown her, suddenly became soft, concerned. My mother cried and hugged her. My father's fury cooled into obligation. They talked about responsibility, about families sticking together, about how Maya needed support now more than ever. Support, tell it to me. They actually said that I should be the bigger person, that I should forgive her. I laughed, right in their faces. They didn't like that. You're being selfish, my mother snapped. This isn't about you anymore. There's a child involved. No, I said. This stopped being about me the moment you decided her pregnancy was more important than my pain. They tried to guilt me into staying, into helping, into being part of some warped image of family unity. I packed my bags that night and left. The only one I kept in touch with was Emma, my youngest sister. She was only 11, too young to understand everything, but old enough to know something awful had happened. She texted me constantly, worried and confused. 2 weeks later, my mom found a way to contact me from a new number. She sent me a wedding invitation. Maya and Kyle were getting married. The message was full of delusions, how it was time to move forward, how families endure hardship, and how I should be there for Maya on her special day. I blocked her. I blocked the number, and I cried harder than I ever had in my life. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was erasure. It was them choosing her, again and again, no matter the cost. I tried to move on, but nothing was the same. The people I had trusted most had broken me in a way that no apology could fix. No ceremony, no child, no family dinner could ever undo what they did. They had taken something from me that I didn't know how to get back. And for a while, I didn't even know if I wanted to. For days after that, I walked around in a fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment in my head, every time I trusted Maya, every lie Kyle told, every memory that now felt like a cruel joke. I stayed in a small apartment I'd sublet for a few months. It was barely furnished, just a bed, a desk, and a kitchen with flickering lights, but it was quiet, no memories attached, just four walls and silence. Sometimes I wondered if I had overreacted, if leaving everything behind was too dramatic. But then I'd open the gallery on my phone, look at the screenshots, and remember this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a long, calculated betrayal. One night, I got a call from a mutual friend. She said Maya had posted a sonogram on social media, captioned it with something like, "Blessed to build a life with the one who truly loves me." The comments were full of congratulations. Even old relatives chimed in with emojis and prayers. No one mentioned me. It wasn't part of the story anymore. I didn't know which hurt more, being betrayed or being erased. Emma called me the next night. She whispered into the phone like someone might hear her. "Mom says you're overreacting," she said, "but I know you're not." That nearly broke me. I tried so hard to shield Emma from all of this, to make sure she still had some version of a family, but now she was stuck between the wreckage, between the sister who raised her and the one who detonated everything. I told her I loved her, that none of this was her fault, that I just needed time. I didn't know how much. What I did know was this: I couldn't go back. Not now, not ever. Even if they begged, even if they finally admitted they were wrong. Because some betrayals don't get forgiven, they just get buried. I wish I could say I got stronger right after that, but I didn't. Uh, in the weeks following Maya's announcement and Kyle's engagement, I unraveled. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was gutted, hollowed out. I'd built my world around people who, it turned out, had no problem burning it all down and dancing in the ashes. I stopped returning calls from friends. I couldn't handle the pity, the hesitation in their voices, the way they didn't know what to say. Even the most well-meaning words felt sharp. I didn't want comfort, I wanted to disappear. Um, my days blurred together. I'd wake up late not because I was resting, but because sleep had become a kind of escape I couldn't resist. I ate only when I remembered to. Sometimes I'd make tea and forget it on the counter until it went cold. The silence in that sublet apartment was so loud, it gave me headaches. The hardest part wasn't Kyle or Maya. It was the realization that my family chose to protect the lie over the truth. They'd rather wrap their arms around the betrayal than stand beside the daughter who did everything right. I kept asking myself, what was I to them? Just an obligation? A placeholder until Maya needed saving? Even when I told myself I was better off without them, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like abandonment. When I was 15 again, crying in my room, while my parents praised Maya's grades, even though I was the one who worked 2 jobs and got into college without help. That kind of pain doesn't disappear. It just waits for a moment like this to show its full shape. One night, I scrolled through our old family photos. There was one that stopped me. Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Kyle had his arm around me. Maya stood on the other side, leaning slightly toward him. Everyone smiled, even me. And all I could think was how fake that moment was, how long they'd been capable of smiling through lies. That night, I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight and my vision blurred. I ended up on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I thought I might throw up. I gripped the side of the sink and whispered, "I can't do this." That was my lowest moment, but somewhere inside that collapse, a small thought crept in. Quiet, but clear. You are still here. It wasn't hopeful, it wasn't triumphant, but it was real. I didn't want to die, I didn't want to disappear, I just wanted the pain to stop. I started writing again, nothing structured, just fragments, bits of memories, sentences that felt too heavy to speak out loud. I didn't reread anything, I just wrote to get it out. My notebook became a second heart, beating, breaking, healing with every line. Emma kept texting, little things, jokes, questions about books, updates on school. She never mentioned Maya or our parents unless I asked, and even then, she tread carefully. I lived for her messages. They were my one thread to something still good. One evening, she sent me a voice memo. It was shaky and quiet. "I miss you," she said. "I don't like it here without you." I cried so hard I had to put the phone across the room. I wanted to fix everything for her, but I couldn't even fix myself. I started walking in the evenings, just around the block at first, then farther. There was something about the movement that helped. It didn't solve anything, but it reminded me that I was still part of the world, that I hadn't vanished, no matter how much it felt like I had. Eventually, I made an appointment with a therapist. I didn't tell anyone. I just went, sat on the couch with my arms crossed, unsure of where to start. But the moment I said it out loud, my sister slept with my boyfriend. The dam broke. Week by week, I dug through the rubble. I talked about my parents, the favoritism, the ways I'd been taught to shrink myself. I talked about Kyle, about how I let my own needs fall away just to keep him happy. I talked about Maya and how I never thought the person who shared my childhood would be the one to destroy my adulthood. And slowly something shifted. Not healed, not yet, but something shifted. I realized I wasn't mourning a breakup. I was grieving a life I thought I had, a future I planned, a family I trusted, all gone. But I was still here, and that had to count for something. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, handwritten. Inside was a birthday card, one of those generic ones you find in a grocery store aisle, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my mom. The message inside was short. "We love you. Don't let this tear us apart. You're still family." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a command disguised as care. I ripped it in half, and then I cried again. Not because I missed them, but because I finally saw the pattern. They wanted access to me without accountability. They wanted the benefits of my presence without the cost of admitting what they did. That was the moment I stopped hoping for an apology, for understanding, for change. I started building a new routine. I picked up part-time work again, something light, just enough to keep me busy. I joined a book club. Even though I didn't talk much at first, I sat at the edge of the circle, nodded when I agreed with something, and smiled when someone made a joke. Little by little, I felt myself thawing. Not trusting, not fully, but thawing. There were still days when everything hurt. When I'd see a sibling duo walking down the street and feel a pang so sharp it left me winded. When I'd hear a song Kyle used to hum and have to leave the store. But those days became less frequent. And I began to believe, just slightly, that maybe the worst was over. Healing didn't come with a grand epiphany or a tearful revelation. It came with mornings where I didn't cry in the shower. It came with nights where I actually slept through without waking up to nightmares of betrayal. It came in moments, small, ordinary, almost invisible. The first time I laughed again, really laughed, was over a burnt grilled cheese sandwich. I'd forgotten it on the stove while scrolling aimlessly through job listings. The fire alarm screamed and I danced around the kitchen with the dish towel, cursing at the smoke. When it was finally quiet, I looked down at the blackened sandwich and started laughing. Loud, ugly, healing. It wasn't the sandwich, of course, it was the absurdity, the reminder that life could still be ridiculous even in the middle of grief. I signed up for a kickboxing class that week, not because I wanted to get fit, but because I needed to hit something. I hit pads until my knuckles ached and my arms trembled. The trainer, a tall woman named Bree, didn't ask why I was there. She just nodded and held the pads. I went back every Tuesday. The routine steadied me. The sweat cleared my head. One night after class, Bree asked if I was a writer. I blinked. "Why would you think that?" You've got the quiet eyes, she said. People with quiet eyes always have a storm behind them. They either fight it or write it. I didn't respond. But that night, I opened my laptop and started typing. It wasn't a journal. It wasn't even coherent, just broken sentences and fragments of memory. But it felt right, like dragging a needle through cloth, stitching meaning where everything had once unraveled. Emma remained my constant. She called often, usually late at night. Sometimes she didn't say much, sometimes she just cried. She was stuck in a house that pretended everything was fine. Our mother had reverted to her fantasy of family unity. Maya played the doting wife, but even Emma could tell the cracks were growing. Kyle didn't have a steady job, the baby was colicky. Tension brewed behind every fake smile. You know, Emma whispered once, they still talk about you like you're the problem. I didn't ask who they were, I didn't care. I'd stopped giving pieces of myself to people who only ever took. Instead, I gave it to myself. I applied to a creative writing fellowship in a city 3 hours away, wrote my application in one sitting, sent it off, and forgot about it. Weeks later, I got the acceptance email, full scholarship, stipend, a fresh start. The day I moved, I didn't tell anyone except Emma. She helped me pack, her eyes shining with pride and something like envy. I wish I could come with you, she said, as we loaded the last box into the car. You will, I told her, one day. The fellowship was the best decision I'd made in years. I was surrounded by people who didn't know my story, who didn't ask intrusive questions or offer pity. They just saw me, a girl with sharp sentences and a lot to say. I wrote as my life depended on it. In many ways, it did. I wrote about the love that broke, about families that lied, about women who walked away from the fire and didn't look back. One of my professors read a short story and pulled me aside. This isn't just writing, she said. It's excavation. You're digging yourself out of a grave. He wasn't wrong. My words were my resurrection. I got a part-time job at an indie bookstore, worked the register during the day and edited stories at night. My life was quiet, but it was mine. No drama, no guilt, no ghosts knocking on the door demanding to be let back in. Then one day, I got a letter from my father. It had been sent months earlier, but somehow got delayed in probate. Inside was a short note written in his uneven handwriting. I'm sorry, he wrote. I let you down. I didn't know how to be strong for you, but I see you now. I hope what I left helps you build something better. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't excuse anything. He just named the failure. And that somehow felt like a gift. The inheritance had arrived quietly, no ceremony, no big check, just a transfer and a summary from the lawyer. I didn't spend it right away. I let it sit untouched, like a fragile thing I wasn't sure how to use. Then one day, I bought a desk. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. It was choosing permanence. I placed it by the window in my apartment overlooking the skyline. I put my laptop on it, my notebooks, my grief, my ambition. That desk became my sanctuary. And at that desk, I wrote the first full draft of my novel. It was raw, angry, poetic. It didn't hold back. I sent it to a small press. 3 weeks later, they emailed asking for the full manuscript. I read their message 3 times before I believed it was real. Emma was the first person I told. You did it, she whispered over the phone. No, I said, I started, because healing isn't the end. It's the beginning. And for the first time in years, I was finally ready to begin. In the weeks that followed, I started receiving messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. An old college friend reached out after stumbling on one of my short stories published in a local literary magazine. I read this and thought, this sounds like you, she wrote. It made me cry. That message sat in my inbox for days before I replied. Yeah, I finally typed, it is me, but I'm okay now. And I was. Not perfect, not unscarred, but okay. Sometimes healing doesn't erase the story. It just lets you live beyond it. I started submitting more stories, building a small following. I didn't use my full name, just my first initial. It felt safer that way, mine but private. A podcast invited me to speak about betrayal, creativity, and rebirth. I said yes. The night before the interview, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced. I wanted to sound strong, collected, but when the mic turned on and the host asked me what got me writing, I said, I wrote because no one else was listening. There was silence. Then the host whispered, "That's powerful." And it was, as it was true. Later that week, I got a package at the bookstore, no return address. Inside, my old high school yearbook with a sticky note on the front. Don't forget who you were before they broke you. No signature, just that. I don't know who sent it, but I kept it, not to remember the pain, to remember the fire, the girl I used to be. She never disappeared. She just needed space to return, and now she had it. It all started again with a single phone call. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, I nearly dropped my phone. It was Maif, her voice, nervous, tight, like she was rehearsing lines. Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but something happened with Kyle. I don't know who else to call. Please call me back. I stared at the screen, frozen. This wasn't part of my plan. I'd worked too damn hard to claw my way out of the chaos she helped create. But curiosity, that ancient poison, slipped through the cracks. I called Emma first. She sighed the moment I mentioned Maya. Yeah, things are getting bad over there. Kyle's been different. Mom's covering for him, but I think it's worse than she admits. Worse how? Money's tight. He's drinking. Maya's been showing up at Mom's with the baby a lot. I paused. Did she say why she called me? She said you're the only one she trusts, to be honest. That part almost made me laugh. Still, something in me twisted. Not pity, not sympathy, something colder, strategy. Because maybe this was the opening I'd been waiting for. I called Maya back. She answered on the first ring, voice shaky. Thank you for calling. I didn't know if you would. Let's be clear, I said. I'm not doing this for you. I just want to know what kind of mess you've dragged everyone into. Now, she swallowed hard. He's been threatening me, not just yelling, real threats. And the money's gone, all of it. My silence must have rattled her because she rushed on. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but you're smart. You always were. I need help and I don't know where else to turn. It was tempting to hang up, to say figure it out like I had to. But instead, I told her to meet me, public place, broad daylight, no baby, just truth. We met at a corner cafe near campus. She looked like a shell of the girl who used to flirt with my boyfriend behind my back, hollow eyes, fidgety hands, like fear had finally caught up to her. She slid a folder across the table, bank statements, proof he drained everything. I skimmed through them. Kyle had been funneling money into a private account for months. Money meant for the baby, for bills, for food. You could go to the police, I said. She shook her head. He said if I do, he'll ruin me. He has photos, messages, stuff from when I was pregnant and stupid. Of course he did. Abusers always keep trophies. I tapped my fingers on the folder, already calculating. Aya thought she was asking for mercy. What she gave me was leverage. Over the next few days, I did what I did best. I researched. I traced Kyle's financial footprints, used the access I still had through the estate lawyer to track cross-referenced withdrawals, and uncovered not just one, but 3 hidden accounts. The man was sloppy and greedy. I sent copies of the files to Maya in a locked folder. This is your safety net, I wrote. If he tries anything, you show this to a lawyer. And I made my move. I didn't want revenge. I wanted precision. Public consequences, private satisfaction. So I reached out to an investigative journalist friend from the fellowship. I gave her everything, names, dates, transactions, screenshots, and Maya's testimony with her permission. The story they ran 2 weeks later was brutal and brilliant. Local contractor accused of fraud, abuse, and financial exploitation. Wife and family speak out. Maya didn't even have to press charges. The article did the work. Kyle's job offers dried up overnight, his side hustles gone. The whispers in their neighborhood turned to silence. No one wanted to be associated with a man like that. He confronted Maya in a rage and tried to break into their house. The cops arrested him. She had my folder, my advice, and this time support. But that wasn't the end. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. She stood at my door holding a pie like it was 1955 and we're still pretending we're a family. I heard what you did, she said softly. I didn't invite her in. I did what had to be done. Her face twitched. You always think you know better. No, I said. I just stopped pretending any of you had power over me. She placed the pie on the ground. You think this redeems you? I stared at her. I don't need redemption. I didn't break this family. She flinched like I'd slapped her. As she turned to leave, I added, next time, bring the truth, not pastry. She didn't come back. Emma called that night. You really did it, she whispered. He's done. I was staring out the window when she said it, watching the city lights flicker like stars that refused to go out. I didn't do it for him, I replied. Or for Maya. I know. There was silence. Then she said, you did it for you. Maybe. Or maybe I did it for the girl I used to be, the one who sat in silence while the people closest to her lied, the one who thought being quiet made her noble, the one who believed family meant loyalty, no matter the cost. That girl was gone now. In her place stood someone sharper, colder, maybe, but clear-eyed. I had turned the tables without ever raising my voice. And for once, I didn't feel like the one surviving the story. I felt like the one writing it, and I was just getting started. The silence that followed felt almost unnatural. No threats, no texts, no mysterious packages. It was the kind of peace that felt like a trick. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Maya to call crying, for my mom to show up at my job, for Emma to text me, shaken. But days turned to weeks and nothing happened. It should have been a relief. Instead, it left me hollow. Because when you spend so long in survival mode, calm starts to feel like a lie. I found myself restless, picking at old scars, rereading messages, watching interviews of people who survived worse, and wondered if I really belonged in their category. Was I a victim, a fighter, or just someone who got lucky at the end? One night, I pulled out the letter Dad had written before he died. I hadn't read it since that first time. My hands shook as I unfolded it again. He wrote, "You were always the one who saw through us. I wish I'd listened to you sooner." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was more than I'd ever expected. Still, it didn't patch the hole he left, or fix the childhood I had to survive, or make up for all the times he stayed silent when he should have stood up. I cried that night, not for him, for the girl I used to be, for the years I spent twisting myself into something lovable, for the idea that if I was just good enough, they'd treat me better. That lie died with him. The next morning, I went to therapy for the first time in months. I walked in and sat down, and my therapist smiled like she'd been waiting. I think I'm finally ready to talk, I said. About what? Everything I didn't say when I was too busy surviving. And I did. I talked about the betrayal, the shame, the quiet rage, the numbness, the years of playing peacekeeper in a war I never started. I talked until my throat went dry and my hands stopped shaking. That session didn't fix me, but it reminded me I was worth fixing. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I sat in silence, other times I screamed into the void of everything I had swallowed for too long. I started writing again, just for me. Pages full of messy thoughts, memories I had buried, moments I wished I could rewrite. One afternoon, I reread something I'd scribbled in the middle of the night. They broke me like I was disposable. I built myself back like I was sacred. I underlined it twice. Emma visited often. We'd get coffee, walk around the park, talk about things that didn't hurt. I miss how it used to be, she said once. I smiled sadly. I don't. She blinked. Really? It was never good. We were just better at pretending. She didn't argue. Instead, she linked her arm through mine. Well, at least now it's real. And it was broken, honest, ours. One evening, I got an email from a professor I admired. She'd read my essay in the fellowship archive and wanted to nominate me for a new writing residency. It's raw, she wrote, but that's why it works. I stared at the screen for a long time. Raw, not polished, not perfect, just true. And that, maybe, was the point of everything. Not to make it pretty, not to package it as redemption, but to speak it, to own it, to let the scar be seen. Because healing wasn't a straight line, it was a loop, a spiral, a messy, beautiful, brutal climb. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where it would take me. A few months later, I visited Dad's grave, not because I forgave him, but because I needed to speak without being interrupted. I stood there in the cold wind, leaves crunching underfoot, and whispered everything I had carried. Not for him, but for me. I survived all of you, I said. But I'm not bitter anymore. I'm just done. It wasn't cinematic, no tears, no dramatic collapse. It's closure. On the way home, I passed by our old house. The lights were on. Maya's car was gone. Mom's curtains are still the same. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I wasn't that girl anymore. No, I was building something new. I moved to a city where no one knew my name. I took the residency. I started teaching workshops on trauma writing. And slowly people showed up. Messy, honest people who weren't afraid to tell their truth. They reminded me of myself. Raw, scared. One student asked, "How do you know when the pain stops defining you?" I said, "When you stop trying to silence it." That's what I'd learned, that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about facing, naming, reclaiming. And I was doing it, one word at a time, no longer surviving. Now, I was living. Sometimes I still flinch when I hear a phone buzz in the middle of the night. Sometimes I dream of that kitchen table, Maya scrolling on her phone, Grace smirking, Dad staring at nothing, Mom pretending. But then I wake up in a room I chose, with a life I built, and I breathe, not because everything is okay, but because I am, and that's enough for now. The last time I saw Maya, it was at a bookstore. I didn't plan it. She didn't either. We just locked eyes across an aisle, me holding a copy of a memoir about betrayal, her with the toddler strapped to her chest. She froze. I didn't. I gave her a nod and turned away. There was nothing left to say, because sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a choice. And I had already made mine. I was done bleeding for people who only came to watch me fall apart. These days, I don't chase forgiveness. I don't chase explanations. I chase peace. And peace looks like this: a tiny apartment with light that spills in through cracked blinds, a shelf full of books that make me feel seen, a plant I keep forgetting to water but somehow keeps growing. Anyway, Emma calls every Sunday. We talk about boys' dreams and podcasts we're obsessed with. Sometimes we cry, mostly we laugh. She's applying to colleges now, says she wants to major in psychology. I want to help people who feel stuck, she told me. You already do, I said. There's a picture of us on my fridge, taken on a random Tuesday with coffee in our hands and wind in our hair. We look like sisters again. Not broken, rebuilt. Some mornings I still wake up expecting a text from my mom, a voicemail. It's a new number calling from the past. But it doesn't come, and I don't go looking. Instead, I go for a walk, I sit at a cafe, I write. I live a life that isn't made of secrets or shame. The girl I used to be wouldn't recognize me now. She'd probably cry from relief. Or maybe she'd just take my hand and whisper, "We made it." And we did. Last week, I hosted my first public reading. A small venue, folding chairs, free coffee, and the hum of nervous voices. I stood at the podium, palms sweaty, heart pounding, read a piece I wrote about being the villain in someone else's family story and how freeing it was to stop chasing redemption. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then came the applause, slow, real, kind. Afterward, a woman my age approached me. She had tear-streaked cheeks and shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You said the thing I've been afraid to admit." I hugged her because I knew what it felt like to finally hear yourself in someone else's story. That night, I walked home under a pale moon with music in my ears and breath in my chest. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I'm not saying everything is perfect now. I still have scars. I still have nights where I flinch at shadows and mornings where I doubt my own strength. But I've stopped trying to go back. There's no going back to before. There's only forward with all the jagged edges and the soft landings. With truth, even when it stings. With boundaries, even when they're lonely. And with love, the kind you build for yourself when no one else offers it. So here's what I know now. Some families destroy you, but you get to decide whether they finish the job. Mine didn't. The last time I saw Maya, it was at a bookstore. I didn't plan it, she didn't either. We just locked eyes across an aisle, me holding a copy of a memoir about betrayal, her with a toddler strapped to her chest. She froze. I didn't. I gave her a nod and turned away. There was nothing left to say, because sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a choice. And I had already made mine. I was done bleeding for people who only came to watch me fall apart. These days, I don't chase forgiveness, I don't chase explanations, I chase peace. And peace looks like this: a tiny apartment with light that spills in through cracked blinds, a shelf full of books that make me feel seen, a plant I keep forgetting to water but somehow keeps growing anyway. Emma calls every Sunday. We talk about boys, dreams, and podcasts we're obsessed with. Sometimes we cry, mostly we laugh. She's applying to colleges now, says she wants to major in psychology. I want to help people who feel stuck, she told me. You already do, I said. There's a picture of us on my fridge, taken on a random Tuesday with coffee in our hands and wind in our hair. We look like sisters again. Not broken, rebuilt. Some mornings I still wake up expecting a text from my mom, a voicemail, a new number calling from the past. But it doesn't come, and I don't go looking. Instead, I go for a walk, I sit at a cafe, I write. I live a life that isn't made of secrets or shame. The girl I used to be wouldn't recognize me now. She'd probably cry from relief. Or maybe she'd just take my hand and whisper, "We made it." And we did. Last week, I hosted my first public reading. A small venue, folding chairs, free coffee, and the hum of nervous voices. I stood at the podium, palms sweaty, heart pounding. I read a piece I wrote about being the villain in someone else's family story and how freeing it was to stop chasing redemption. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then came the applause. Slow, real, kind. Afterward, a woman my age approached me. She had tear-streaked cheeks and shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You said the thing I've been afraid to admit." I hugged her because I knew what it felt like to finally hear yourself in someone else's story. That night, I walked home under a pale moon with music in my ears and breath in my chest. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I'm not saying everything is perfect now. I still have scars. I still have nights where I flinch at shadows and mornings where I doubt my own strength. But I've stopped trying to go back. There's no going back to before. This is only with all the jagged edges and like the soft landings. With truth, even when it stings. With boundaries, even when they're lonely. And with love, the kind you build for yourself when no one else offers it. So here's what I know now. Some families destroy you, but you get to decide whether they finish the job. Mine didn't. 2 months ago, got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in tight, careful handwriting. Opened it slowly, expecting another jab from the past, but it wasn't from Maya or my mom or anyone I knew. It was from a woman who had found my story online, one of the essays I'd published through the residency. She wrote, "I left my husband last year after reading your piece. I didn't know I was allowed to want more until I saw someone else survive." I read the letter 3 times. Then I cried because all the nights I stayed up questioning if telling the truth was worth it. This made it worth it. This woman, a stranger, reminded me of healing ripples. Those stories save people, even our ugliest ones, especially our ugliest ones. Now I keep her letter pinned above my desk, right next to a photo of me and Emma at the beach, our feet buried in the sand, salt in our hair. When I look at it, I don't see the girl who was betrayed. I see the woman who built herself back from ashes. A few weeks ago, Emma asked if I'd ever reach out to mom again. I didn't answer right away. Then I said maybe, but it won't be to ask for anything. And I meant it. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for me. It's the freedom to move on without dragging their guilt behind me like a suitcase full of glass. That's what I'm doing now. Moving forward, lighter, sharper, whole. I still have bad days, but they don't own me anymore. I do. This morning I watered my plant before it asked. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and let the light hit my face. I didn't check my phone for voices from the past. I didn't wonder what Maya was doing or whether mom still spun stories about me. I just breathed. That's what healing looks like some days. Not fireworks, not revelations. Just choose yourself again and again and again. And knowing finally that it's enough.